Welcome back. This is the second video of Lecture 8. In the previous video, we ran two models about the relationship between citizens and government, customer model and owner model. The customer model assumes that citizens will purchase public services based on their self-interest and provide feedback about service quality to public managers. And first, the public manager will be responsible for improving service quality based on such feedback. In the customer model, citizens are relatively passive, and public manager will drive the relationship between citizen and government as a service provider. On one hand, the owner model expects citizens to measure, monitor, and report behavior of public managers. In owner model, citizens will set the goals and drive the relationship between citizen and government, so public managers are relatively passive. Their main role is to achieve the goals set by citizens. Smith and Hantzman of Course Reading presents a new model, value model, which views citizens as investors or shareholders. According to them, value model exists between customer model and owner model. It expects citizens to co-invest with other citizens and government in the creation of incremental wealth consistent with citizens' needs, and to influence the collective goals and direction of the community. In other words, citizens will invest only assets that are valuable for the public rather than individual self-interest. Also, unlike customer model and owner model, citizens and public officials are in equal position as co-investors or shareholders of the government. Since citizens and public officials will create public values together, decision-making process will be more decentralized and democratic than other models. This sounds good. In this model, citizens, public officials, and other stakeholders will work together to create public values. But don't you think there is a cost-efficient issues in citizen participation? So we'll see advantages and disadvantages of citizen participation from the next slide. The first advantage of citizen participation, identified by Irving and Stansbury, is education. Involved citizens will become familiar about public issues and first encouraged to solve these issues with government. The second advantage is political persuasion. Involved citizens will be affected by public officials about their public policies at a certain degree. If they are convinced by the proposed policy direction, they may be able to convince other community members to go for the policy. Similarly, community members also easily affect public officials through citizen participation. Citizens can create closer relationships with public officials and politicians through citizen participation. That is a third advantage, empowerment. Fourth, through such interaction between citizen and government, citizen participation might be able to help communities break gridlock about some issues. Fifth, there is a possibility of reducing litigation costs in citizen participation, since it aims to increase communication between citizens and government. First, Abby and Stansbury Course Reading will talk about advantages of citizen participation in environment management, but it's too specific for this lecture, so I'll just skip it. There's no perfect thing in the world, so we need to see disadvantages of citizen participation. The remarkable disadvantage of citizen participation is high cost, especially high transaction cost of decision-making. It is clear that decision-making of citizens, public officials, and other stakeholders will require more time and cost than that of a single agency administrator. Second, large communities will face more difficulties of building a consensus between diverse citizens than small communities. Third, if citizens are very happy with administration of their government, they might not be encouraged to participate in decision-making. The main reason why some citizens involved in the government decision-making might be their dissatisfaction with their government. The first disadvantage, representation, is quite an important issue. Statistical data shows that active citizens are relatively rich and educated. So the voices in town meeting and trustee boards might not represent the poor and low-educated. We'll discuss this critical issue of democracy later. Fifth, without strong authority, collective decision-making tends to be diffuse. Nobody has clear power to make a direction. Sixth, once decision is made in a collaborative councils, it's quite difficult to change. As we discussed in the first disadvantage, representation, such decision might not represent the general opinion of citizens. If that is the case, such powerful wrong decision becomes very problematic in a community. Seventh, related to first disadvantage, representation, active citizens might share a kind of same characteristics. For instance, some scholars argue that active citizens tend to be more altruistic, so their decisions tend to show stronger concerns for others. On one hand, other scholars argue that active citizens tend to focus more on self-interest. I don't know which is right, but the point here is that active citizens or involved citizens might have specific characteristics. So we run advantages and disadvantages of citizen participation. And further, having understandably identified ideal and non-ideal conditions of citizen participation for public managers. For instance, if citizens have high degrees of volunteerism, it's favorable for public managers to have citizen participation opportunities. Also, if the community is homogeneous, it's easier for public managers to build a consensus. Move to benefit indicators. If citizens feel the need of breaking the gridlock about an issue, that citizen participation opportunity will become beneficial. Also, if participants are very influential in their community, that citizen participation can become beneficial. So like this, ideal and non-ideal conditions for citizen participation is based on a series of advantages and disadvantages of citizen participation we've just run, so I don't go for the details. But these non-ideal conditions for citizen participation raise a critical issue to public managers. For instance, if we have low-income residents as key stakeholders, or our community is geographically large, don't we need to have citizen participation opportunity? As a scholar of public administration, I personally believe answer should be yes. Despite non-ideal conditions, we need to have citizen participation. But in actuality, it's impossible for public managers to involve all the citizens in government decision making. Finally, I'd like to identify the two main issues with citizen participation. How can public administrators involve the poor or low-educated in government decision making? According to the empirical evidences, since citizen participation requires high cost and knowledge of public issues, the poor and low-educated tend to be inactive. The second question is quite important in the US democracy. It represents a concern that citizen participation in public administration might break the traditional check and balance system by weakening the power and authority of the legislative branch. In the US democracy, the main tool of sending voice to the government was the election. But if public officials start to take voices directly from citizens, the election might lose the authority. As a consequence, instead of elected officials, politicians, public officials might have more power to direct policy issues with citizens. So we'll discuss these quite important issues in the discussion board. See you there. Bye.